Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. So in this lesson, we'll be discussing grouped continuous data that we have when it comes to statistics. Before I dive into this, I would expect that you've already watched my previous video, which is part one on statistics. And if you did, you'd probably be able to now identify what's grouped and what's ungrouped. Now, whenever I talk about grouped, in simple words, we can always identify this easily. So I can say whenever you have a table, that's my definition of saying it's grouped. Now, this is where it becomes a little tricky. So in the last, recording, you might see that I've told you if I were to figure out mean, the formula for that is summation fx over summation of f. What does this f stands for? This is my frequency. Similarly, I did mention that this x stands for something that is the other variable, or you could say the other column that we have. But that is true for discrete. When it comes to continuous data, x will always stand for midpoint. And this weird Greek symbol over here means sum of. What does sum mean? We add. That's what it means. So if you check out this example that I have made by myself, it says that in this table, you're given with an interval, you're given with a frequency. Again, what kind of table is this? It's a grouped continuous data. Why is it continuous? Because you can see the range over here, or perhaps this interval over here. It says any value between 0 and 20. Again, this could be a lot of numbers, So when I say list down the numbers between 0 and 20, the answer is infinite. The reason why I say that is because it could be 10, it could be 20, it could be, can't be 20 by the way, it can be 10, it can be 12, 13, even 13.5, even 12.99999. So there are countless numbers that we have within this inequality. And for this reason, we say that this is infinite. And again, that's the definition of continuous data that we have. Like I mentioned, for anything that's grouped, mean is equal to sigma or summation fx over summation of f. So let's try this out. In this case, can I say if I were to figure out the midpoint? So I can probably make another column over here. And if I were to figure out the midpoint, remember that you always take the first value and the last value and you divide it by 2. So I can say in this case, 0 plus 20 over 2, which gives us just 10. So midpoint is going to be 10. Similarly, the next one, well, that's easy. I can do it directly. That's going to be 30. This over here will be 50. Now, like I said, what we need is fx. So frequency times the midpoint. X represents midpoint. And if there's nothing in between, that means they're getting multiplied. So 10 times 3, that's 30. 30 times 4, that's going to be 120. 50 times 3, that's going to be 150. If I were to compute in this case, that's going to be mean is equal to 30 plus 120 plus 150. And in my denominator, I'll write down the frequency, which is 3, 4, 7, and then 10. So I know that's going to be 10 in this case. If I were to add this up, this should give you 300 over 10, which gives you 30. That means that's going to be my mean. Some of you might be wondering as to why and how can we take midpoint? How can we randomly just figure out the mean? In O levels and IGCSE, everyone, they would never ask you to figure out mean. They're going to ask you to estimate mean. And that's how you estimate, by the way. So what I'm teaching you over here is that there is no way, there is one exact way of finding mean, but that's not required in O levels. So in O levels and IGCSE, they would expect that you figure out the estimation of mean, and this is how you do it. If this concept is clear, let's quickly look at one of the questions. So this is again one of the worksheets. You should be able to find this in the folder that I've uploaded. The first part of the question says, one day a farmer collected 300 eggs from his chicken. Just by reading this line over here, I should be able to identify that this over here is my total. That means the total over here is 300. In a similar way, they have given us mass, they've given us frequency. And what kind of data is this? Just by looking at it, you should be able to identify there's a range. That means it has to be grouped, continuous data over here. Now that I've figured out that it's grouped continuous data, I now need to figure out the mean. So I know mean is equal to summation fx over summation of f. Now we do have the frequency, and like I said, this x over here represents my midpoint. So in order to figure out the midpoint, I can make another row over here. So just by looking over here, as in I can see that the midpoint of this should be 44. Are we supposed to show this in our working? Not really. Similarly, what's the midpoint of this? I know that has to be 47. Similarly, that has to be 49. This has to be 52. This has to be 56. And similarly, this has to be 62. I would highly request all of you to please, in your calculator during the exam, I would expect that you put these numbers and you divide them by 2. Please don't do this directly, even if you're very confident. The reason why I say that is because I've seen a lot of students making this kind of silly mistake. And if you do, you lose all the marks. I don't want that to happen, which is why I would highly suggest, please, individually 48 plus 50 over 2, that's going to give you 49. Anyways, having said this, now that I have this, the way in which you represent your steps, that's also very important, because if you check the marking scheme, you'd realize there's something known as a method mark. So you would try to maximize, to gain those marks. Now let's try to figure out the value. If you check out my previous video as well, I did mention that it's very important for you to multiply this as a step. Don't make another row over here. So in this practice example that we just did, I did make that row because I was trying to explain this to you. However, in your exam, I would expect that you show this as a part of your working. So in this case, I know that the first step has to be 44, that's my midpoint, times frequency, plus 47 times 40, plus 49 times 48, plus, in case you're confused, I'm multiplying these numbers with these corresponding values. In a similar way, that's going to be 52 times 72, plus 56 times 56. And finally, we have 62 times 24. In my denominator, I know that the total is 300. If you don't believe my words, you can add all of this, and that should give you 300 as well. If I did this in my calculator, let's see what the answer comes out to be. So my numerator comes out to be 15,240. In a similar way, my denominator stays 300. If I did this in my calculator, this ends up giving me 50.8 as my answer. And this right here, everyone, is my mean. I hope this question makes sense. In a very similar way, let's move on to the next part. If you check out the next part over here, it says cumulative frequency table. The word cumulative means that we are trying to add up. The word cumulative means sum of. So when I say cumulative frequency table, what does that mean? Sum of frequency table. Frequency table. That's how it works. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back and take a screenshot of this table over here so that I can actually fill out the values. All right, let's clean this mess. And let's try to attach it right here. All right, so if you look at this table over here, you'll realize that it says anything in between 42 till 46 is going to be 60. So my question to you over here is, what's the value till 42? Can I say before 42 it's going to be 0? That's exactly the case. Before 42 it's going to be 0. Till 46, what's the total? We know in between 42 and 46 we have 60. And before 42 we have 0. So 0 plus 60 gives you 60. In a similar way, the next part over here says, so I can say that the value, the total till this point is 60. In a similar way, if I were to add 40, can I say the total till 48 is going to be 100? In a very similar way, if I keep moving And if I add 100 to 148, can I say that's going to be 148? In a similar way, can't you also add 72, which should give you 220? I keep adding, which should give me 276. And finally, 300 as my total answer. Now, all I need to do is just fill out in this table. So let's see. At 42 or till 42, we are having the total as 100. That means 100 goes over here. Similarly, till 50, we are having 148. So I also write down this number. Till 54, we are having 220 as my total. Till 58, we are having 276. And finally, till 66, we are having 300. That is already there for us. There's one more important thing that you need to realize. In any cumulative frequency table, the total should never exceed the one that's mentioned in the question. So if I go back, you'll realize there are 300 eggs. That means your table, whatever you draw, should also correspond to this value. Now comes the next part where they expect you to draw out this cumulative frequency table. So they're telling us that at 42, the interval or the value, cumulative frequency is 0. When it comes to a cumulative frequency table, on your y-axis, we have frequency, cumulative frequency. And on the x-axis, we have the mass or the other variable, whatever the question is talking about. In this case, we have mass. So we know that the coordinate that I need to plot is going to be 42 and 0. So I'm going to zoom in. And this over here should be 42 and 0. In a similar way, the next is 46 and 60. So 46 should be somewhere over here. 48 and 100. All right, so this is 48 and somewhere around this. And these points may not be too accurate, so I would expect that you please count the axes and do this carefully. 48 and 100. In a similar way, the next one is 50 and 148. 50 and then we have 148. In a similar way, we got 54 and 220. So 220 should be somewhere close to this number. In a similar way, 58 and 276. And finally, we have 66 and 300. So if I were to join this, again, it says smooth cumulative frequency. That means you're supposed to use a pencil. Ideally, when you're drawing this, I would expect that it should be drawn in a way where the line forms a curve at the end. What I have drawn is not the best, but again, I'm doing this on a writing pad, so yes, I can promise you that I can draw a much better graph if I had a graph paper with me. Anyways, now that I've done this, the second part of the question says, use your graph to find the median of the eggs. The question that I have is, what's the total that's given to us? How many eggs do we have? If you go back to the question, there were 300 eggs. The same is written over here as well. That means we have a total of 300 eggs, total of 300 eggs. So the question is asking us, what's the median mass? Now, what's half of 300? Can I say that's 150? Yes. So in this case over here, I would expect that you draw a straight dotted line to show this to the examiner that the value comes out to be, I don't know, somewhere close to 52 or perhaps 51. Again, I should remind you that in these kind of questions, they totally allow you to have an approximated value. That means you'll see that in the marking scheme, there's always a range given. In a similar way, the next part of the question says to figure out the interquartile range. What does that mean? Interquartile range means upper quartile minus lower quartile. Upper quartile, so there are different ways of explaining upper quartile. Some people say it's 3/4 of the total value. Again, I feel a little more comfortable with decimals, so I'm just going to say that's 0.75 of the total, of total. That's how I can define upper quartile. In a similar way, I can define lower quartile as the 25% or 0.25 of the total, of total. So again, they expect us to use the graph, so please be very careful in these kind of questions. So again, we know the total over here, everyone, is 300x. Now, if I ask you what's 75% of 300, so you can say the upper quartile, the value that you're supposed to look is going to be on the y-axis at 225. Are we supposed to write this down? Not really. In a similar way, what's 25% of 300? Well, that's just going to be 75. Again, are we supposed to write this down? No. I would expect that you figure out the upper quartile and the lower quartile directly and list that as your working. So in this case, I know 225 is going to be over here. And from this point, I will draw a straight line that intersects this graph. Again, it should be a dotted line. So this comes out to be 54. So now this is something I'll write down. I'll say that my upper quartile is going to be 54. Can I erase this? Yes. In a similar way, the lower quartile was 75. So we know 75 is somewhere over here. Now, if I again draw a straight dotted line, you'll see that it should intersect somewhere between 46 and 47. So let's just say 47. Again, I'm telling you the values that I've taken, they're not too precise. So I would expect that you should be doing this very precisely with the graph paper. So again, let's say the lower quartile comes out to be 47. Now in your working, you can say, well, that has to be 54 minus 47, which comes out to be 7. Again, that's just my answer. If you check out the marking scheme, you'd realize that they have given you a list of values. So if you check the marking scheme, the values kind of range from 7.25 to 8. So they do give you that advantage of, having a value which is approximated, because all of you would have drawn the curve a little differently. Some of you might have drawn the graph in this way. Some of you might have drawn the graph a little more, or perhaps maybe a little in this way. So somehow, however you draw, there's going to be a difference of your answer, but more or less, they're going to be very close. So I hope this one question is clear, where we discussed mean. In a similar way, we also discussed the fact about cumulative frequency and how we can use that graph to figure out the interquartile and the median. With this, everyone, we come to an end. We'll probably continue this in the next video. Till then, adios.